There are a total of 118 cards in Clash Royale now. While some cards have been at the top consistently, others are becoming more irrelevant day by day. Today we're looking at the worst card for every Elixir cost in Clash Royale. Starting off, the worst one Elixir card you can use is the Healed Spirit, a card that sounds great but fails in reality. You see, it's supposed to jump and heal your troops. Simple, right? But most of the time, it does absolutely nothing. Let's talk about its biggest problem. The Healed Spirit is extremely unreliable. You play it hoping it heals your push, but what happens? It fails to heal the troops in time or gets countered easily. Therefore, the question arises, is the Healed Spirit even worth it? Not really. Unless you time it perfectly, it doesn't make much of a difference. Healed Spirit only works in very specific decks, maybe in some bridge spam decks. But even then, those decks don't really need it. They would still work fine with a different cycle card. Now compare it to Ice Spirit and Fire Spirit. Ice Spirit freezes troops. That 1 second freeze can save you on defense. Fire Spirit burns swarms like Skeleton Army and Goblins. Both spirits always give value, but Heal Spirit, it's a gamble. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it completely flops. And in Clash Royale, you want cards that work every time. No one uses Healed Spirit. Why? Because Ice Spirit and Fire Spirit are just better. The card is totally useless on defense. It can neither counter swarms nor delay pushes. To be honest, I don't recall the last time I played the Healed Spirit, and I think most of you will agree with me, it simply doesn't do enough. So let's be real, the Healed Spirit is too weak, too situational, and too inconsistent. It's outclassed by other 1 Elixir cards, and most of the time, it won't help you win. As the worst 2 Elixir card, we have Clash Royale's newest troop, Berserker. I feel the Berserker is really underwhelming. In fact, it's only meant to be used with the Rune Giant. In any other deck, she's extremely weak. Berserker's biggest weakness is that she gets little to no value against cards that attack well. While she may deal significant damage over time to win conditions, she's useless against basically every card that can attack in Clash Royale. Her low hit points make her very unreliable because she dies quickly to even swarms. Her low HP also makes her vulnerable to any kind of spells. Although I understand that she costs only 2 Elixir, but if you look at it, 2 Elixir cards are some of the strongest cards in the game, and almost every 2 Elixir card provides value in some way or the other. Currently, the Berserker sits at a low 45% win rate, something rather shocking for a new card in Clash Royale. The Berserker is quite new, and it can take some time to balance her for sure. But right now, considering all the better options we have in the game for 2 Elixir, I don't think she'll be used a lot. Bomber and Bats are better in many ways. These cards also provide an offensive threat because of their evolutions. On the other hand, Berserker is no threat on offense. You can basically use any card in the game that can attack to counter her on offense. After all, she's supposed to be used as a defensive card, but guess what? She sucks even at that role. You can never rely on the Berserker alone to counter anything. Melee cards in the game need to have some decent HP in order to be good, but the Berserker lacks hit points to make her viable. Maybe another buff is coming her way soon, and she can be decent finally, but as of now, the card is just bad and unusable in meta decks. The Berserker hasn't supported me in my games so far, but guess what? You guys can if you subscribe and like this video. For 3 Elixir, the worst card you can have in your deck is Clone. This shouldn't really come off as a surprise in my opinion. The Clone spell sounds amazing on paper. It instantly doubles your entire push, creating twice the threat in an instant. But in reality, it's one of the riskiest, most inconsistent, and least reliable cards in Clash Royale. First, let's talk about how fragile cloned troops are. They spawn with only 1 HP. That means any spell, splash damage, or even a stiff breeze will wipe them out instantly. A simple zap, arrows, or fireball completely shuts down your entire clone push. And if your opponent has a poison spell or tornado, you're actually cooked. That's 3 Elixir fully wasted. And let's talk about deck synergy. Clone only works with a handful of very specific decks. Lava Hound? Maybe. Golem? Sometimes. Skeleton Barrel? Decent. But in almost every other deck, it's useless. You can't just throw a clone spell into a deck and expect it to work. It's too risky. Another major problem? Clone forces you to overcommit. To get value, you need a big push, but if your opponent stops that push, you're doomed. You wasted all your elixir and now they have a free counterattack. You'll have nothing to defend with since you just wasted your elixir on a clone push. Clone is considered to be the worst spell in the game, and I don't think any one of you would disagree here. Gone are the days when clone decks used to be feared. Now, they're just free wins for your opponent. Therefore, clone is too inconsistent, too easy to counter, and too dependent on perfect conditions. It's either a game-winning move or a complete waste of 3 elixir. And in Clash Royale, you don't want a card that's a coin flip and is so matchup dependent. Just like clone, what are the most matchup dependent cards in Clash Royale? Comment down below. The worst 4 elixir card in Clash Royale, without doubt, is the Furnace. Furnace used to be a nightmare to deal with. Back in the day, it was everywhere. Now, it's one of the worst cards in Clash Royale. Let me break it down for you. Furnace spawns fire spirits every few seconds. At first, it may seem like it's a great way to chip away at towers and control the arena, but in reality, it just doesn't work anymore. Why? First, fire spirits aren't as strong as they used to be. They used to be a real threat, but after multiple nerfs, they barely scratch towers. And if your opponent has a building, your furnace is basically useless. But that's not the only problem. The card is way too slow. It takes time to spawn fire spirits, meaning it doesn't help in fast-paced battles. If your opponent rushes you with Hog Rider or Royal Hogs, Furnace won't stop them. You'll take massive damage before it even does anything. And let's talk about its cost. 4 elixir is too much. For that cost, you could play a Musketeer, a Bomb Tower, or a Dark Prince. All of these give immediate value, but Furnace, you have to wait for it to do something, and most of the time, your opponent will deal with it before it gives any real value. But what about chip damage? Doesn't Furnace pressure your opponent? Not really. Most players can ignore it or counter it easily. Any Spirit, Barbarian Barrel, or even Skeletons can keep it distracted. And if they have Poison or Earthquake, your Furnace is toast. Let's compare it to Tombstone. Well, the Tombstone actually counters tanks and provides value, but Furnace just spawns weak fire spirits that rarely make an impact. Yeah, no way I'm choosing an oven that bakes pancakes over a Tombstone. Therefore, Furnace just doesn't fit in today's Clash Royale meta. It's slow, expensive, and easy to counter. Other cards do its job better, faster, and cheaper. As the worst card for 5 elixir, we have the Witch. To be honest, it was a tough call between the Minion Horde and the Witch, but ultimately I decided to go with the Witch because her stats are absolutely terrible. Witch looks scary, but in reality she's one of the worst cards in Clash Royale. She's supposed to be a powerful support unit that spawns skeletons and deals splash damage. But let's be real, she's way too weak for her cost. First, she takes forever to do anything. She has a slow hit speed, and her skeletons take time to build. But in Clash Royale, you don't have time to wait. A good support card needs to make an impact fast. But Witch, she just stands there, slowly spawning skeletons while your opponent rushes your tower. But what about her splash damage? It's not even that good. She doesn't hit hard enough to stop big pushes. Therefore, she struggles against fast-moving units like Hog Rider or Ram Rider. Even her skeletons don't help much. They just get wiped out by Log, Zap, or any splash attacker. And let's talk about her biggest problem. Her stats are terrible. For 5 elixir, she should be tanky, but she gets destroyed by Fireball. If your opponent has Poison or Lightning, she's gone instantly. A card that dies to spells so easily is not worth 5 elixir, therefore she doesn't work in actual good decks. Look at what the other 5 elixir cards offer. Archer Queen, way better at dealing damage. Executioner, stronger splash damage. Electro Dragon, stuns and resets enemy units. Witch, she spawns some skeletons and dies. Witch is slow, fragile, and too easy to counter. Other cards do her job better, cheaper, and faster. For 6 elixir, we may have what's considered to be the worst card in Clash Royale. Enter the Barbarian Hut. Barbarian Hut is one of the most expensive cards in Clash Royale. For 6 elixir, you'd expect something powerful, something game-changing. But what do you actually get? A slow, clunky building that barely does anything. First, let's talk about its biggest problem, its cost. At 6 Elixir, Barbarian Hut is one of the most expensive cards in the game. That means if you place it at the wrong time, you're in big trouble. Your opponents can rush you with a Hog Rider, Balloon, or Elite Barbarians, and you won't have enough Elixir to defend. One bad cycle? Game over! But let's say you do get it down safely. What happens next? Every few seconds, 3 barbarians spawn and walk slowly toward the enemy, but by the time they reach the bridge, your opponent has already dealt with them. A simple fireball, Valkyrie, or log completely shuts them down. You spent 6 Elixir, and your opponent defended for 3 or 4. That's a horrible trade. But what about defense? Doesn't Barbarian Hut help against pushes? Not really. Unlike other buildings, it doesn't counter many win conditions that well, and when it does spawn barbarians, they often appear too late to stop the damage. Compare that to a cannon or a tombstone, which cost way less and do the job better. I've played quite a few games with the Barbarian Hut myself, and I'm yet to find a situation where it outperforms any other building in Clash Royale. There's another big issue. It's a huge target for spells. Poison, Fireball, Earthquake, all of these destroy it. And since it's so expensive, losing it to a spell feels like a massive waste of Elixir. The Barbarian that spawns after it's destroyed is useless and can't defend anything. Therefore, it doesn't fit into any strong deck. It's too expensive, too slow, and too easy to counter. There are simply better and cheaper ways to control the battlefield. At this point, Supercell needs to buff or rework the Barbarian Hut fast if they want to stop it from fading into irrelevance. I do agree, though, that it's not an easy card to balance. If you were the head of making the balance changes, what would you change about the Barbarian Hut? As the worst 7 Elixir card, we have the Electro Giant. Personally, I like the Electro Giant. I don't think he is necessarily bad, but considering that there are only 4 7 Elixir cards in the game, he's comparatively not as good as the rest. Electro Giant used to be one of the most feared cards in Clash Royale. Drop him at the bridge and he would zap everything in his path. But now, he's one of the underperforming high-cost cards in the game. First, let's talk about his biggest weakness, buildings. Electro Giant relies on enemies attacking him so he can reflect damage. But if your opponent has a building, he's useless. A simple cannon, bomb tower, or Tesla completely shuts him down. And if they drop an Inferno tower, you can say goodbye to your 7 Elixir investment. And speaking of Elixir, 7 is a lot. He's one of the most expensive cards in the game. That means if your push fails, you're in big trouble. Your opponent can counter him for way less Elixir, then punish you with a fast counter attack. You won't have enough Elixir to defend and you'll take massive damage. But let's say you support him. Does that fix his problems? Not really. Even with lightning, he still struggles against buildings. His sight range is so long, which makes him target buildings placed far away. And since he moves so slowly, your opponent has plenty of time to cycle back to another counter. Another problem, his damage is horrible. Electro Giant only deals real damage when troops attack him. But against troops with long range like Musketeer, Magic Archer, or Electro Wizard, he can't do anything. If your opponent spaces out their defense, his ability becomes almost useless. Therefore, Electro Giant doesn't fit into the current meta. He's too expensive, too easy to counter, and doesn't do enough damage for his cost. If your opponent has a good defense, he's completely useless. Speaking of 8 and 9 Elixir cards, there are only 1 of each, so, well, we don't have any other choice but to consider Golem and 3 Musketeers as the worst cards for their cost. Both of them suck anyways, though. Well, frankly speaking, these cards are actually so bad that playing them should be considered a sin. Speaking of sins, have you ever wondered what cards in Clash Royale can represent the 7 deadly sins? Watch this video to find out.